there's 4 rooms?
There's 4 rooms. The most effective use of this room is often just a straight observation. So the subject is sitting here, you're watching them from here, and we have laptops here. So there's a video recording, you can log events in it, and then you can send at any point, you can send them a questionnaire that you have written to get their immediate feedback on the situation. You know, we get the champion of the organization comes in, and they're the ones running the test, right? And it's always, you know, we thought there was something wrong here, and now I've seen it, and now I know what I can do about it. So it really is true, you know, you have to watch people using stuff that you build in order to see what the real problems are. And it's amazing what you can see. We're not looking for statistical proofs, we're just looking for usage to see what the problems are. It's quite amazing. We didn't have this at the start. So what we did is what many places do is, you know, we would find someone who's on vacation and we would use their office, right? And we had some eye tracking and stuff like this, but the first eye tracking stuff that we had was so picky, you know, is like, if you move your head a bit, it would just totally need recalibration. So that's why Toby's stuff is so much better, but it was so much more expensive. This is good because it is so measurable, right? It's not something that we just talk about. We didn't really build this thing to charge for it, right? Okay. And then, of course, we're looking at it, and it's like, what the hell are we going to do with it? So we charged them $5,000 a day.
A day.
Yeah. So that paid for the technician to help them out. That paid, and that was an 8-hour day. So.
For 4 rooms that you could run in parallel?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, the thing is, I was always worried that if we had 4 rooms going at the same time, it would just be so chaotic that the test would be screwed up. But we had 4 teams running. We did 22 tests in 4 hours. You'll see the screen that they're using. You'll see their mouse movements over there, and in a little screen in screen, you'll actually see their face.
And all that goes into the Moray recording.
All that goes into the Moray recording. And if we were using eye tracking on top of it, it'll be a layer on top.
The software has this timeline kind of metaphor to it, and what you can do here is kind of come in here and start visualizing some of the things the students were showing us. At the top here, you can see you can analyze, and there's all these visualization tools. It lets you overlay the heat map of certain areas. So the overall recording, this is where my eye kind of focused on, which was kind of obvious. But we can get really granular. These are kind of like the gaze plots. So the sequentialness of where my eye moved overall. And if you hover over these, you can see where I started. And you can get really granular with the analysis. If they don't believe you, here's the eyes of my users. You can argue with them how long they're gazing. And that kind of hard data is really beneficial to kind of explain to what's happening in the experience. Whether it's taking long or too short, we can, I call it, we make the invisible visible with this kind of information. So I always like just, if you're really at an organization where you're just trying to push this change through and no one's listening, if they're not going to listen to you, let's show them the user's voice and what they're seeing and experiencing, and let that do the talking to convince them where we need to take a product experience next. So that's what I like about this stuff. It really lets the data does the talking if it's presented properly. What we're going to do is kind of talk about usability and design and how we're looking at it here at Humber. The lab's given us great bandwidth to collaborate with industry, and you'll get a chance to see what's possible with it. So I want to kind of first start the discussion. You can't talk about usability without talking about great design. And the quote I really like is, it's not just how well it looks, it's about how well it works. And that's, I think those are intrinsic things to kind of reiterate when we talk about this. Jared Spool is also someone I think that really elevates the conversation when it comes to usability. It's usually good design's invisible, but we notice it right away when things don't work properly, right? So that's another nice little key insight I think that's nice to pay attention to. But how did we get to usability? I think I always like drawing on some historical references, and it really helps build the picture up and get us to where we are today and where we're going. Traditionally, if you think about software development, early on it was just about coding, testing, shipping, right? I think as we move forward, there was some strategic kind kind of a process put in place where, okay, we need to sort of build out a scope and build out some early requirements, and then code and test, and then ship. But as we kind of saw, software got really complex, and as the languages started evolving and we got to object-oriented programming, we started building projects in different ways and managing code in different ways. And I think it was really not fair to really burden the developers to test and code in that stage. And we saw how things changed where a QA role kind of built out, and things required, figuring out where the bugs are, things were crashing, and finding those and building that into our cycle. But as we kind of move forward from that, we decided, hey, as computers started getting super fast and a GUI was introduced, part of a software experience, it became really important. The designer came into that conversation of building out the right user experience. And we were limited by technology, what could really drive the graphics. But you can kind of see as design became part of the conversation, user testing and usability folks became really part of that equation to get to great software products. And this is kind of where we are today, where design is really thought about early on, figuring out what are we exactly going to build, and how do we move forward from that coding and then build out that loop. And there's a lot of variations around this with agile and sprints. So, and when we think about waterfall versus agile, I think that's, we can spur on the conversation, but I wanted to kind of iterate how we got to today. So a lot of us have come across signage before where we look at a street sign and say, oh my gosh, okay, what exactly can't do? I had my
car towed in a place like that.
Oh, really? Wow. So, it's information overload, right? A lot of times we do this to our users. We inundate them with so much content, we feel like, okay, I'll give them everything, they'll figure it out. And, obviously that overwhelms our users, but we should kind of step back and think, what do we need to show at the time they need it? And so, this was an interesting redesign that I came across some student work. And yeah, information overload is something for us to really think about when we think of usability. So thinking of how we can remap and present that information. And this was a student example of redesigning, the parking schedule. Where am I allowed and not allowed to park? So they kind of redesigned and looked at that as an infographic and kind of really illustrated to the user what they can and can't do in this parking space. So understanding what your users need, then designing based on that, this really helps reduce that information overload, right? It's something I'm sure all of us can really align to. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. But yeah, for sure. So sometimes we might unintentionally build friction in user experiences and usability. And it's mostly due to aesthetics and novelty reasons, and it's detrimental to the users. And I want to bring this example up of KLM, and you'll see this interface in the way it works or doesn't work, and what they're trying to do. And sometimes, for the sake of novelty, we try to create some sort of experience out of that, but I'll show you what exactly happens. So we add friction to this user action. So I'll play this video of this interaction. You can see the user has to scroll up, and then they keep going through the deck, which is pretty obvious. Then they come across, and then they're asked to do something really quick. It flickers. You're not sure what that was. You're like, okay, what do I do here? I click out of here. There's a rollover, you hold it, and then you realize I have to keep holding it. Then you go back. It takes a while to figure out what you have to do here. You actually have to hold on to that. And sometimes when we're creating these user experiences, just to play a video, we're being really novel, and it's mostly for novelty, but the goal was just to play this video, right? So sometimes there's this, I guess, battle between design the way it looks, by the way it works.
KLM, they're trying to sell tickets for an airplane?
Yeah, they want to bring you into this experience. So you can see how visually we can overthink things, and sometimes testing can really help us identify this. So I want to kind of start with this example, but I want to flip that coin around. Where do we use friction in an interface where it's a good thing, right? So we can take that idea of friction and execute it really badly, but if we take the idea of friction, where do we add it to an interface? So if you look at the elastic scrolling in iOS, it's actually quite an intuitive feature, and it really lets the user know when we add friction to the end of an experience to tell them, hey, that's it, there's no more to discover. And good design is just invisible, right? But you can kind of see how when designers and developers really work well together, they come up with these user experiences and test to make sure. So there's nothing needs to be explained. When you need to explain, if you saw that earlier slide, if you need to explain to the user what to do, I think you've kind of dropped the ball here, right? There's no dialogue here needed to explain to the user what's happening. The elastic scroll indicates that tension and gives that feedback to the user that that's it, there's no more to discover. So here's another great example of designing for designers, right? Rather than the user. Sometimes we do this and we reduce legibility of the headlines and its creators and determination to deliver something novel. I'd call it, is this clever design? Probably. But is it bad design? So let's watch what happens here. So the user kind of creates, and you can read that. So you can kind of see that's all it does. So you wonder, like, okay, what's the point, right? Who's our audience? Is it the designer or is it the user, right? So sometimes I think we get in our own little bubble and just come up with these little concepts, but how do we make sure we're designing for the user, right? So sometimes we fall into this trap, designing for novelty's sake. So clever design that ignores usability, right? Like someone looks at that first, and it's like, it really takes you a second to really read that. And we all know that red and blue tend to be these colors that create a lot of tension and attract and create almost like friction. And there's a reason why we use red and blue when it comes to police sirens or emergency vehicles, because we want to drive someone's attention and create some sort of tension to it. But sometimes we use it in a way where we're just trying to read a headline, right? We're overthinking things. So here's there's actually Dribble's full of like really bad UI. Really beautiful UI, but it also functional wise. This animation's in total takes about 3.5 seconds, and all it has to do is transition the user out of what they've bought. So a simple fade in would have been suffice. And think of all the development that needs to happen to kind of get this user in and out of this experience. And sometimes we add these features that really can be detrimental to the performance of that output. And yeah, I feel sometimes the tension between designers and developers, I think is good, because it challenges us to really get to the efficiency, not just in the visual design, but in the coding as well, right? I think it's interesting to watch how developers and designers work. Designers are always trying to pull out and get to the bare essentials of a design and just use the minimum to create that great visual. And but developers do the same thing. They try to write out code in as efficiently as possible. And if they can do the same thing in 15 lines of code versus 30, that increases the performance. So we both have the same goals, but we achieve it in different ways. So that's something I talk about with my students a lot when it comes to user experience.
Is it total wrong?
What's that?
Why is it total wrong?
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, Dribble, a lot of it's aspirational.
After all that flashing.
Yeah. Designers kind of skip math class a bit, right? So I'd call this superfluous animation. So let's look at also, when an animation is done purposefully, the checkout experience of Stripe, the animation that they have here. So this is kind of nice. Sometimes we're given a verification code, and then once you put in that code, it's nice to give the user that subtle feedback that something's been happening, right? Sometimes we give that little feedback, and we didn't have to overthink it. Just a simple segue in, slide in that detail about it's sent, and usually they'll get a notification. But sometimes we overthink animation and just tend to create these like novelties that really aren't necessary, that we're designing for the designer. So that's one way to solve this problem and just really think about usability. So as we continue on this topic, I want us to consider like really 5 simple things. And this is from Rachel Nabers that was invited to web animation expert at the worldwide W3C. And she kind of says to keep these 5 things in mind. Sometimes animate deliberately. We think through each animation before we create it and just question it. Is this really what we need? So I think the designers have to really just challenge themselves. If it takes more than the 12 principles from Disney animation, but it's not necessarily for a website and app, I think sometimes we mix up those principles and use so many of them that it really overdoes the project. You want to think useful and necessary, then beautiful, right? I think keeping that usefulness and that utility is really important, and that's why usability, we have to always keep it at the forefront of this. And sometimes aesthetics do take a back seat to the UX. So go 4 times faster. Good animation are unobtrusive, which means they run fast. So one of the nice example I like is when you put your wrong password in Mac, how the screen shakes and tells the user, hey, this is wrong. It's so simple and discreet because it uses a real life metaphor of when someone tells you you can't do something, they usually wave their finger. I got that as a kid a lot. I would go around and not supposedly do something, but I would do it anyways. And it's nice to use metaphors in real life and translate them into a really simple design. And some of the background that I've heard on podcasts of how this stuff gets developed, some of these UI designers will come up with them, whether they're working at Apple or Google. The one I heard was from Apple, that visual animation, the designer just came up with it and didn't know where to use it. So they had a repository of all these techniques they were playing around with, but they weren't sure where to use them. So they shared them with all the teams across the different software parts of the OS. And then one team that was working on login saw it and said, can we use this for our login? And he said, yeah, sure. So sometimes these animation, these techniques are really happen by accident, but there's this interdisciplinary collaboration that needs to happen by accident sometimes.
Do you think that simulates the shaking of your head and
Yep.
actually simulates the vision that you would get if you did this while looking at that?
Yeah.
I think that's what it's actually.
Yeah, so it's quite fascinating, and that's a really good example of good animation. So part of it is the takeaway for this was understanding what users need, then delivering that information. Really, that research really drives the more we understand that. If you got lots of information to create, try using visuals instead of text, like that signage and said, is all this text, can we use visuals to kind of show that to the user? Always label your links. Users don't like mystery links sometimes. And avoid adding any kind of friction. But friction is one of these things where sometimes we can use it in a design, or sometimes it's strategically placed to create not bad design, but sometimes we make things hard to find on purpose. I think companies that we're trying to get in touch with that have contact numbers, they always bury that, and you wonder, like, is that strategically done, right? So you can see how friction is something that we can use it in good and bad ways. And test your clever design and include them cautiously, right? Like, really try to understand, is this just clever or is it really good design? And animation is like cursing. If you overuse it, it loses its impact, right? You can swear to have a point to something, but if you start swearing all the time, no one's going to take you seriously. So one thing I want to get into is the Usability Lab. I want to give you a background on how we get our students to think about some of the strategies and key uses that we have for the lab. So we start with visual design basics with the students and have them understand, just simple principles of design, whether it's line, color, space. A lot of our graphics programs, they kind of build this foundational knowledge in the students. Understanding contrast, alignment, proximity, repetition. These things kind of really stack their knowledge. Once we establish that kind of basics with them, we put on top interface. So a lot of these companies that build these platforms for us, they've spent a lot of times building these UI controls, whether it's a desktop, web, mobile. We kind of take the time to teach the students the components and where do we use these components and why, and learn the taxonomy of them. So this is a really important step, especially when you're building interface. Once you know the pieces of the puzzle, you can start putting them together to create a bigger picture. So once they understand that, there's the visuals of mobile as well, and understanding for touch kind of adds another level of complexity. And then web. But on top of that, once we establish those, then there's the layer of interaction design. And it's really important that we be distinctive when we teach this stuff and use it and scaffold the students' knowledge. Because interaction design gets into the flow. And how does a user move in and out of experience? And what exactly are the decisions they make? And we help the students articulate that in their designs by building out these flows. And this was a student that a couple years ago that really did a great job of just really articulating the decisions in each part of their app and where it goes in that step. And it's a really important artifact that really you present to other stakeholders, whether it's developers or product managers, to help communicate your product. So this is an important step towards usability. So once we have this established in the students, we learn to observe and listen with our eyes and understand qualitative versus quantitative data. And you'll see the students that present their work tonight, how they observed when they looked at how Hyundai users went to their website, how they interacted with both the mobile and the desktop experience, and what they did. You'll see what they said versus what they did, and we always looked for that. So part of understanding this is doing task analysis. And one of the really lightweight exercises we used to do is create these like task sheets and find out how many steps does it take to do something. And as we'd observe the user, marking off and giving it a criteria of easy, hard, or gave up. So this is a really simple exercise we would give to students, and we would do multiple tests, and it was a really good way to onboard the students to the topic of task analysis. So, and it became this lightweight exercise, and it helped the students appreciate this step because it helped uncover problems in their design. And we were asking them to really pay attention to what the user tells you versus what they do. And when you see contrast in that, because that could really be a telling sign of when things are working and not working. So once we establish that kind of stack on top, we do get to the topic of usability and eventually accessibility in the design here at Humber. And part of the tech that you'll see in the lab that we use is eye tracking software. So this was in order to get to the really good stuff we'll show you tonight, we had to do some convincing with the administration because the really good eye tracking is expensive. So I spent a year ahead of time finding a really economical and effective solution I can teach in class. So this was about $1,000, this open source eye tracking system from Pupil Labs. And the software is open source. So we all know working with open source, it's free. Like there's going to be things you're going to have to put up with and tinker with, right? So I knew that right out of the gate. So calibrating the device was a bit cumbersome, but I learned a lot having to calibrate this thing. And it did get me to start teaching the students eye tracking and what to look for in eye tracking. So as I introduced the technology to them, I started showing them, what you can and can't do with it and what you need to see. So we kind of started getting to the point with mobile of students would build really high fidelity prototypes, and we would test out and see what the users were doing. But I had a problem in this step, and I'll show you how I tried to solve it. My students wouldn't spend a lot of time, here, I'll rewind that. My students wouldn't spend a lot of time at the paper prototyping stage, and they wouldn't think about these user flows. They wouldn't think about, they would just sketch things really quick in class right before 5 minutes and then present them to me and say, here's my flow. And I'd be like, this looks like a tic-tac-toe game. This doesn't look like a detailed, thorough, well thought out flow. So I told them, listen, if you're gonna show me your paper prototype before you build your high fidelity, I need to see all the flows to your design, very detailed, because we're gonna eye track it. So then they kind of got curious. They're like, whoa, you're gonna eye track this? It's like, and I said, well, yeah, I wanna see exactly how this is gonna work. So they had to go back to the drawing board, and I told them a day before, I have to see all your flows to make sure everything is working like you intended. So then they started showing up to class with really detailed stuff at the paper prototyping stage, and they had really thought out how the functionality would work. And this is what we kind of looked at as they were testing out their design. So they can kind of see, at this stage, I was just getting them to appreciate where the user was looking at in their design and how they were moving through it as they were explaining it. So it created more buy-in, and the students' work quality got really thorough at this stage. And by the time they got to finally designing, a lot of the details were worked out. So going back to the administrators with this, I said, here's the value of investing in eye tracking is going to really have for us. This is the quality of work that we can get the students to do when they pay attention to this. So that's where they were able to open up and find some budget and buy us more advanced TOBI eye tracking, which you'll see later this evening. But around this topic of usability is we fall on inclusive design as well. So when we're designing and thinking about universal design principles, here at Humber we're really looking at the big picture. How do we design for everyone, right? We really care about that topic, and not just thinking about markets, but thinking about also everyone else that fits within certain criteria of needs. And how do we design for that? So here at Humber, we also have an inclusive design component to our education. So it's offered to both industry and students. So all the students actually have it loaded in their curriculum and learn about it and have these modules to work through. But we also include it in our usability class, whether it's learning about eye tracking or learning about design for color impairment or coding in details. A lot of this stuff is covered to make media more accessible. So a lot of this is done in the lab, but you'll see later on this evening. The lab itself is pretty modular. It collapses and it can be moved on site to work with an industry partner around the city. And it has a lot of, we can run multiple tests. So you'll see the monitors, the way they're set up. They're corresponding with each booth. So we can run multiple tests at the same time and collect that data and set up in a very collaborative layout so the students can kind of share their insights and learn from each other. But ultimately, when it comes to usability, we really care about these 5 components. We're really trying to figure out how well someone learns this new design that we're going through, how efficient this design is, how memorable that idea is. And I think some of us have kind of gone through this before where we've done something in a software package and then we go back to it later on and we forget, how did I do that again? And that memorability is really important in the design, and we have to consider that when we're designing for usability. And also the amount of errors someone does and workarounds they do in a product experience. That could really be detrimental, especially if your product is an e-commerce. You'll get lots of students or lots of users dropping off from your experience and leaving that basket and not checking out with it. And then the overall design part is the satisfaction. How well did users really enjoy that overall experience? But I want to tie it up there. But again, I just want to reiterate that when we talk about design and usability, it's about how well, not just how well it looks, it's about how well it works. So I'll leave it there. All right, thanks.